More and more companies are using satellites to augment the existing cell phone tower system on Earth. The cell phone towers on Earth are still the best, but thanks to groups like Starlink, you now have some pretty darn good service all over the planet. Those thousands of Starlink satellites are having really good communications. There was a recent test flight of the Starship spacecraft where they actually were using Starlink to have up to the minute communication as this starship was coming in to orbit and coming in to land, and we had some fantastic videos of the reentry burn. It was really cool. How good is cellular communication in space? The answer is pretty good. We've improved upon our communication from point A to point B around the Earth using the cell phone towers, but now we can augment it with satellites. In the past, satellite phones were extremely expensive. Actually, they still are. But with the advent of the Starlink system, it's a lot easier to make communication back and forth around you go wherever you go around the Earth. Now in space, there have been some demonstrations of using the Starlink system from spacecraft to spacecraft and spacecraft to Earth that is far more reliable than the older systems that NASA's been using. And the advantage is, of course, they have many satellites in orbit, many small satellites in orbit. In the past, you had to rely on having the satellite being in the right orbital plane so it can see you and the relay station on Earth. Things are changing now. It's not as dependent on just a handful of satellites. Now we have a lot of satellites. But this is just orbit. We're not talking about the moon. We're not talking about Mars yet. Eventually, we need to have a Starlink type system in orbit around the moon and eventually in orbit around Mars so we can have a proper interplanetary internet. So the interplanetary internet concept was invented by a guy by the name of Vint Cerf. Vint Cerf was one of the early designers of the internet itself, TCP/IP protocol. And he worked as a VP at Google for many years. He was a pioneer in this technology for, reliable communication anywhere, anytime. And so he had something called delay tolerant networking, which he developed with Google and with NASA to create a satellite system that could communicate between Earth and Mars reliably. You still have to deal with the long distances, so there's a long time out there. But the idea is that you don't lose any of the message. The whole message goes all the way through to Mars and back. If we had the theoretical Starlink style communication systems between here and there. That's the missing link right now for interplanetary internet is we need this multiple satellites, not just 3 or 4 or 5. We're talking dozens and dozens in orbit around the moon, in orbit around Mars, and maybe in between those places as well to help create stable communications between those locations. This is part of the internet infrastructure that I talk about in my book, Creature Comforts in Space. With that infrastructure, it makes it easier and safer for humans to go further and further beyond Earth.